This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com. Okay, we're going to go through question 2 from the December 2008 paper F5 exam, which is called Shifters Haulage. So make sure you've got a copy of the question in front of you, either from a revision kit or preferably downloaded from the ACCA website. The reason I say preferably from the website is that I must make it clear when this question was asked, instead of there being 5 questions of 20 marks each as there are now, in 2008 there used to be 4 questions of 25 marks each. So the overall level of difficulty was the same, it's just that when it was 25 marks you were expected to do slightly more. And so I'm going through the original question. Certainly in the BPP revision kit, they've missed out part A to make the question shorter, which may confuse a bit. So again, best is to have the copy from the ACCA website. However, first of all, as always, look at the requirements. Part A, explain the principles behind the maximax, maximin and expected value criteria that are sometimes used to make decisions in uncertain situations. Well, immediately we know what sort of question it is. Part B, prepare a profits table. Part C, using the profit table, which van should they buy? It's decision making under uncertainty, where you've got to be aware of 4 ways of making decisions, of which 3 of them are mentioned here. Maximax, maximin, expected value. The one that isn't mentioned here, but of course could have been, is minimax regret. Let's make a start. Now part A, in fact we don't need to read the information in the question at all. It says explain the principles behind them, 4 marks. So it's not wanting a lot, but doesn't need any numbers. If you've half forgotten or you're wondering how to put it in words, still write a little bit, but leave the rest of the page blank. Carry on with the numbers, but leave the page blank, because as you're doing the numbers, you may come back and be able to think of a bit more to write. However, let's explain the principles very briefly. So maximax, first of all. When we're uncertain, there's a range of possible profits we could end up with. With maximax, we identify the highest profit from each course of action. And to make the decision, we choose the action that gives the best of these highest profits. It really is something, to be honest, that you should have learned. If you're having problems with it, go back and find the lecture on this website and go through it slowly. It's worth mentioning at the same time, it doesn't not specifically ask for, but with maximax, somebody who takes that sort of decision, we call them a risk seeker. They may get the best possible return, but they take the risk of getting the worst. What else? Maximin. Again, several ways you can write it, but I think my way is as good as any. With maximin, we identify the worst profit, or the lowest profit, from each course of action. And then we choose the action that gives the best of these worst outcomes. The sort of individual who would take this sort of approach, it's a risk avoider decision. By choosing the best of the worst outcomes, we've made sure that we can't possibly do any worse. Finally, expected values. With expected values, again, when we're uncertain, when there's several possible outcomes, we calculate the weighted average of the possible outcomes for each course of action. And of course, that weighted average we call the expected value. And to make the decision, we choose the action that gives the highest of these expected values. And again, although not specifically asked for, somebody who makes a decision this way, we say is risk neutral. In that we're basing the decision on the average, we're ignoring the fact that the actual return might be a lot higher, or for that matter, maybe a lot lower. Alright, that's part A, 4 marks. Let's now move on to the numbers part B. Part B says prepare a profits table showing the 6 possible profit figures per period. Now obviously I'm going to go back, we're going to need to read the information in the question. But there are various ways you can present your table. There's no best way, but the way I always do it is effectively as a sort of matrix. I say to myself, and again it doesn't matter which way around you do this at all, but we need to discover 2 things. What is it we're making a decision over? We'll read the question in a moment and find out. But secondly, what will affect the profit is what decision we make, but also whatever it is that's uncertain. Now I am going to go back and read the detail, but there's a little trick here, because whether this question you find very obvious or not, many times, especially in the middle of an exam, you can end up getting confused and choosing the wrong variables. But effectively, the examiner will always tell you, because even though we're doing part B, just look to part C. It says using your profit table, discuss which type of van SH should buy. So it's telling you what it is we're having to decide. What we're having to decide is the type of van. Now let's look back and see what types of van are available. Shifters Haulage is considering changing some of the vans it uses to transport crates for customers. The new vans come in 3 sizes: small, medium and large. SH is unsure about which type to buy. So that's what we've got to decide. A small van, a medium van, or a large van. And of course, we need to read all the numbers in a moment, but depending which we choose, that'll affect how much profit we make. Also note, in that first paragraph, it tells us the capacity. The capacity is 100 crates for the small van, 150 for the medium, 200 for the large. So although I don't quite know what the relevance is, if we buy a small van, it holds 100 crates, a medium one holds 150, a large one 200. Well, that's what we're going to have to decide. The next thing, of course, is what is it that's uncertain? Well, again, a little trick. It may be very, very obvious to you here, but if you're ever unsure, or because there's always the danger you've misread, you should remember that because we're going to end up looking at expected values, possibly, if ever expected values are asked, you have to be given the probability of the uncertain ones. And so look through the question for probabilities, and in fact it's in the second paragraph. The second paragraph says demand for crates varies and can be either 120 or 190 per period, with the probability of the higher demand figure being 0.6. So there's the probability. The probability is given for the level of demand. So that's what's uncertain. And the demand, it says, can either be 120 crates or 190. And then I don't forget later, the probability of the higher one, so 190, is 0.6. The lower one is therefore 0.4. Now what I've got to do is, for each combination, and there are of course now 6 possible situations, we've got to work out the profit. So let's try and fill it in. And reference your workings nicely. So first of all, let's suppose we're here. A small van and low demand. Well, remember, a small van only holds 100 crates. The demand is 120. Well, we've got a problem. Now let's read the rest of the question. The sales price per crate is $10. The variable cost, $4. For van of all sizes, subject to the fact that if the capacity of the van is greater than the demand per crates, then the cost will be lower by 10%. So if ever we have the situation where demand is higher than where demand is lower than the capacity of the van, the variable cost will be $4 less 10%. SH is concerned that if the demand exceeds the capacity, customers will have to be turned away. And in this case, goodwill would have to be charged against the profits to allow for lost sales. And finally, depreciation. 200 for the small, 300 for the medium, 400 for the large. So that's going to be easy. All right, let's have a go. We're going to do if number 1 occurs. Small van, 120. Well, here, the demand is higher than the capacity. If the van only holds 100 crates, we can only sell 100. And so, I'm not going to show full workings here, so listen carefully and check me. We're going to sell 100. The selling price is $10 each. And therefore, the revenue is 1,000. The costs, well, we've got variable costs. It's $4 per crate. So, again, we're selling 100, remember? At $4 is 400. However, because the demand is higher than the capacity and we're turning ones away, there's this goodwill charge of 100. And finally, there's depreciation. Well, remember, we're dealing with a small van, so it's 200. So the profit in this case, 457, 300. Well, let's carry on. Obviously, we've got 9 to do in total, so let's see how fast we can be. Let's do this one. Again, we're selling, demand rather is more than capacity, so we'll only sell 100. And if we're only selling 100, then as before, sales 1,000. As before, the variable cost 400. Well, everything is before, surely. We've got the goodwill cost, we've got the depreciation. So that was an easy one. Demand was higher, but remember, capacity, we can only sell what the van holds. What about this one? This time, demand is less than capacity. So demand's 120. So we'll only sell 120, which at $10 is $1,200. The variable cost, though, because the capacity is higher than demand, the variable costs will be 10% lower. So instead of being $4, there'll be $3.60. Again, we're selling 120, which gives me $4.32. We've no lost goodwill. However, we have depreciation, and depreciation for a medium van is 300. So this time our profit is what? 468. Let's move on to this one, number 4. Demand 190. The van only holds 150, so we can only sell 150. And 150 at $10 is 1,500. Because the van's full, it'll be the full $4 a unit variable cost, which on 150 is $600. Again, because we're turning away demand, we will lose goodwill. And the depreciation, it's a medium van, 300. So 6, 7, 10. This time I get a profit of 500. Nearly there. Number 5. The van holds 200. We are selling 120. So we'll only sell 120, $10, $1,200. Now, because the van's not full, the variable costs will be lower at $3.60. And for the 120 units we sell, $4.32. We've no lost goodwill. We can sell all 120, but we've got depreciation, which for the large van is 400. What does that give us? A profit of 368. Finally, number 6. Where are we? Van holds 200, we sell 190. So we sell all 190 at $10 is 1,900. The van isn't full, so the variable cost is only 360 a unit, which on 190 is 684. We've no lost goodwill. We've got depreciation, large van 400. And so the final profit figure, 816. Now just one word of warning here. Although I've finished, and there we are, that's right, and that's what, 9 marks, it's that bit which can take far too long. I know it takes quite a while to read it and sort out what's happening. Even when you've sorted out what's happening, it does take time, obviously, to do it 6 times, and it's very easy, however good you are, to make silly mistakes. However, do watch your time. Appreciate it's worth spending a fair bit of time for 9 marks. That's what? 9, 18, about 16.2 minutes. But don't spend too long, because even if you haven't finished it, you could still potentially get full marks of Part C by proving you knew how to make the decisions. And certainly you could get full marks of Part D. So there's the big danger. If necessary, it's better to have not finished B, got some marks but not finished, but got high marks for C and D. That would be far better than finishing B but losing all the marks for C and D. However, let's turn to part C, and the point is you'll get full marks here for doing the right thing on any figures you've got. Using your profit table, discuss which type of van SH should buy, taking into consideration the possible risk attitudes of the managers. What does he mean there? Well, look at the last paragraph of the question. SH in the past has been very aggressive in its decision making, pressing ahead with rapid growth strategies. However, its managers have recently grown more cautious as we've become more competitive. So, what does it say? Taking into consideration the possible risk attitudes. Well, the first thing that's mentioned is that we were aggressive. Or rapid growth. Well, that would suggest surely a risk seeker approach. Which we mentioned in part A, is a Maximax approach. And what would you do under Maximax? Well, remember, with three choices, small, medium or large, the best or the maximum profit in each case. The best from small 300, from medium 500, large 816. Maximax, you choose the best, the maximum, and therefore you would choose large vans. The second line there says we've become more cautious as we've become more competitive. Well, if we're more cautious, really two possible approaches, and for the exam best to show both. If you're more cautious, I think you're more likely perhaps to be risk neutral. In which case we'd use expected values. And so let's do an expected value approach. Well, again, small, medium, large. For expected values, the weighted average. So remember the probabilities, 0.4, 0.6. However, for a small, it's 300 whatever happens. And so for a small, the expected value is 300. It's silly wasting time. However, for a medium, we are going to have to wait a 0.4 probability of 468, if it's low demand, a 0.6 probability of 500. So 0.4 times 468 plus 0.6 times, I think it was 500, which gives a weighted average or an expected 487.2. And finally large, well again 0.4, 0.6 of this time 368 and 816. Sorry, but then I don't forget. But 0.4 of one, 0.6 of the other, which gives us how much? I think 636.8. And show the workings I've done. You know, you don't have to spend time writing too much. But even, I think my figures are right, but even if I've made a mistake, I've shown that I know what I'm doing, so an arithmetic mistake would only be half a mark. However, the best of those, the highest, is 636.8, in which case, again, you'd choose a large van. However, given that we're more cautious, the other approach we might take is a risk avoider approach. Maxi min. And so again, for each of them, small, medium, large, in each case, what's the worst outcome or the minimum? It was either, where are we? 300, 468, 368? And we pick the best or the maximum of those minimum ones. And so on this basis, you'd choose the medium van. Now the question does say discuss which type they should buy, and so it's worth adding one extra line that there is no one best answer, but given that they have always been aggressive, and all right, they've grown more cautious, I think it's good to put a recommendation to say I would recommend large van, partly based on their previous strategy, but also the risk neutral approach. Which is more cautious. I could perhaps have written it slightly better, but I think that would be sufficient for most, if not all, of those 6 marks. Finally, a bit that I thought was pretty difficult, to be honest, to get full marks certainly, but described 3 methods, other than those mentioned there above, which businesses can use to analyse and assess the risk that exists in its decision making. Now I think this was very badly worded, because it says ways in which you can analyse and assess the risk. It also says, other than those mentioned there above, well, those mentioned there weren't really analysing and assessing the risk. But because he wrote that, I think a lot of people would write minimax regret. Now that's not in fact what he wanted, but he did accept that it could have been better worded, and you did get credit for mentioning that. But the point is, it doesn't really analyse and assess the risk. What he was really after, again, I think it's hard in the middle of an exam to get the full marks here, but one thing certainly he could have mentioned is more market research. In that surely, although it does cost money, the more market research you have done, the more certain you might be about the likelihood of it being high demand, low demand, or whatever. And so, market research, it costs money, but will give more information on which to base the decision. A second thing you could have mentioned, which is very textbook to be honest, this is something you should have learned, is sensitivity analysis. And sensitivity analysis, it doesn't remove the risk, but given that one huge problem is any of our estimates could be wrong, not about the size of the van, but certainly the probabilities, for instance, the sensitivity, it measures the change that we can afford in our estimates before the decision is affected. Now, an obvious thing to look at here would be the probability of high demand, which is 0.6, well, that's obviously only an estimate. What happens if the probability of high demand changed and was 0.55 or 0.5? Well, sensitivity would simply measure the percentage change before the decision changes. Finally, the third thing you could mention, again, very textbook, but is simulation. Something you could never be expected to perform in the exam using numbers, but certainly could be mentioned as here as a little bit of a written. And what simulation is effectively you'd use a computer to calculate the result of all possible situations. In this particular example, all possible levels of demand. Here it just said it was either 120 or 190, but realistically the demand is there's like to be a whole range of demands. It might be anything between 120 and 190. Well, you could use a computer to deal with all possible levels of demand and then analyse the probabilities of different levels of profitability. And so there we are. Now, overall, I think that was a very hard question in the time. I mean, remember, the exam it was set, there was 25 marks, and so you'd have had 45 minutes. If there is one of these in your exam, it will be shorter, even though each bit of this is allowed to be examined. So it's a good one for practice, but it's certainly one of the harder ones.